to Subsidies from Fairmont Prep on the affirmative. Is anybody not ready? Fairmont affirms resolve. The United States federal government should substantially increase its investment in domestic nuclear energy. Nuclear energy has the potential to revolutionize our energy system, as the Office of Nuclear Energy 21 finds that nuclear energy is 2 times more efficient than natural gas and coal, and 3 times more reliable than wind and solar plants. Indeed, Oracle 22 explains that nuclear energy has the potential to cut land, water, and emissions compared to traditional and renewable methods. Thus, our sole contention is 1 small step for man, 1 giant leap for mankind. Nuclear energy has the capability to transform the US in 3 ways. Our first argument is about artificial intelligence, or AI. Data centers for AI are devastating climate, as Current 24 finds that carbon emissions of Microsoft have grown by 29% and Google's grew by 48% due to AI use. That's why Patel 25 finds that by 2027, current energy production methods would limit AI's growth by over 40%. This is the perfect opportunity for nuclear energy, as Brumfield in 24 explains that the growing energy need for AI leaves nuclear as the only option because it is more reliable than other forms of energy. Luckily, affirming salts, as Furtado in 25 writes that small modular reactors are ideal for data management because they provide a powerful source of stable energy, boosting public confidence. There are 2 impacts. First, healthcare. Kalonji finds that AI has the potential to reduce misdiagnosis rates by 40%, and Wilser in 24 adds that AI can slash treatment time by 50%. Our second argument is about the economy. Isparkaradi from 25 finds that AI will boost the US GDP by 21% by 2030, and IDC from 25 adds that investment in AI will yield $22 trillion by 2030. Our second argument is about cancer. Cancer rates are on the rise, and Collins 24 finds that new cases of cancer in the US have reached 2 million per year. Luckily, nuclear energy investment can solve, as Hatch in 22 writes that a new nuclear medicine known as scandium-47 can provide better imaging for not only identification, but the treatment of cancer as well. From studies conducted, this is the closest cure for cancer we have currently. However, without investment into this nuclear technology, the costs for producing large quantities of the life-saving medicine are extremely high. That's why Nussbaum 13 explains that construction of research reactors run on nuclear energy are extremely cost-efficient, safe, and produce scandium-47 at a higher rate. Morgan 24 finds that cancer is the leading cause of death, taking over 600,000 lives per year. Here's our chance to solve it. Our third argument is about climate change. Lazary from February writes that 2024 was the hottest year ever and CO2 emissions increased by 50%. However, nuclear energy provides the action we desperately need, as Casella 18 explains that renewable energy cannot meet increasing energy demand. The only solution is nuclear energy. Indeed, Kviston 15 concludes that nuclear energy could replace all fossil fuels in under 10 years. And in countries like Sweden, nuclear energy has dropped prices and reduced oil consumption by 40%. Past implementations prove our argument true. Kurecha in 13 quantifies that nuclear energy has saved 83 million people in the past globally and potential to save millions more. And when the US invests in nuclear energy, countries around the world model, according to Buchanan in 17. Absent action, Spectre 19 finds that global warming will kill 50 million people and create 1 billion refugees, increasing instability around the world. Thus, it's time to change, we affirm.
Do you guys mind just giving 1 piece of evidence about how nuclear will replace fossil fuels in 10 years?
Yeah.
Perfect.
The highlight you want to look at, Dean, is where it says decade.
Sounds good.
Funny story. I did not cut the chain. twice, the second time adding the other chain.
That's all good.
Yep.
Okay, we got it.
Let me know when you're ready.
Judge, just to reiterate, I'm Christopher Lawrence speaking first for Pump. We are in litigation. Is everyone ready? Alright, I'll start with my first word. We negate resolve that the United States federal government should substantially increase its investment in domestic nuclear energy. As the shift to clean energy gains momentum, nuclear power is becoming a relic of the past. Lori Bird from the World Institute in 2025 argues renewables, wind, solar, hydro, and geothermal energy accounted for 90% of the U.S. new electricity in 2024. America is on pace to meet demand, but continued investment is bad, as Bird argues that reaching 90% carbon-free by 2035 will need more growth in generation. Ember 25 rejoices, wind and solar generated more than coal for the first time. The rise in demand was faster than the rise in emissions, making electricity the cleanest it has ever been. An abrupt shift to nuclear would be a step backwards. Jacobson in 2019 finds the planning to operation times of all nuclear plants ever built has been 10 to 19 years or more, and thus, Cook 19 concludes, by the time a plant is operating, the situation in the electricity market will change through to make that plant unnecessary. Subsidies for nuclear power make as much sense as reviving the whale oil industry. The problems don't stop there. Nuclear investment brings two dangers to the table. First is bad bailouts. Federal investment would come in the form of a national nuclear subsidy to prop up the failing industry. LaForge 17 finds to postpone nuclear power's inevitable demise, the failed industry needs to make subsidies nationwide. And ratepayers, homepayers, paying electricity bills would bear the cost. Cooper 13 finds, due to the high cost and risk of reactor construction, shifting the risk to ratepayers is the only way reactors will be built. The nature of the nuclear subsidy incentivizes risk-taking and intentional cost ballooning. Cooper furthers that subsidies induce utilities to undertake risky behaviors, as the cost of failures will be borne by ratepayers in the form of cost overruns. And that's why Romana 24 continues that the high cost is not a problem for developers because they get paid in any case. Indeed, the more the cost, the more the profit to the utility. And utilities regularly gold plate capital additions to earn more profit. And it's hiking energy prices are bust. Cooper concludes that companies that had rushed to sign contracts were stuck with overpriced projects that would have been canceled if stockholder funds were at risk. Ratepayers picked up 85% of total costs. Therefore, national investment would mean widespread poverty. UCS 19 argues 2 reactors in Florida already raised customers' bills by 10%, and Clementi 14 warns a 10% increase in energy costs would put 840,000 Americans into poverty. The second danger is an alternative energy trade-off. Allocating federal funds to nuclear energy would disproportionately advantage the industry, diverting critical investments away from alternative energy sources. Millsap 19 argues subsidies to nuclear plants crowd out more efficient electricity, and the profit motive for investing in a new capacity is weakened if new plants are not allowed to outcompete less efficient plants for market share. And TOC 19 corroborates political interventions destroy future investment confidence, and companies face an additional barrier to entry if the government insulates uneconomic competitors. Additionally, nuclear crowds out renewable integration on power grids, as nuclear cannot be shut off when wind, solar, or hydro are at max production. DeVos 10 argues the inflexibility of nuclear energy prevents the feed-in of renewable energy into the grid, and nuclear's dominance blocks the connection. And empirically, DeVos concludes that the U.S. states with no nuclear plants have 3 times as much renewable energy as states building plants. As such, prioritizing nuclear power would lead to economic and environmental destruction. U.S. PERG finds energy efficiency measures deliver five times more electricity than nuclear. Wind farms can produce 10% more nuclear, solar 1/3 more. Clean energy resources can substantially reduce pollution at half the cost and twice the government job creation. And overall, UCS confirms that significantly expanding energy efficiency and renewable sources could reduce emissions by 84%. A forced nuclear resurgence could make efforts to cut emissions more costly. Thus, Curve 22 concludes that the U.S. can achieve net zero while creating 500,000 new jobs and avoiding thousands of needless deaths. Thus, we proudly negate. Are you ready for cross?
Can I get all the pieces of evidence that are under the subsidies arguments,
Sure.
from uniqueness all the way to impact.
Would you like to stand up or sit down for
I'm
Carlos?
gonna wait for it to comment.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
wait.
Do you want me to send all the cards?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay. I gotta send them the new chain actually. Okay. Just send them.
As soon as we get that, we can.
Sounds good.
Can I have the first question since I spoke first?
Yeah, of course.
Let's talk a little bit about renewables. Why specifically are we not seeing the necessary amount of investment in renewables right now?
We are. As
Wait.
Corey Bird from the World Resources Institute says that right now renewables are 90% up. 90% of the United States electricity is renewables from wind, geothermal, or solar. So we are seeing
That's just
necessary.
fundamentally untrue. Your 90% evidence is about new energy, but also I would contend that in your argument, you say that investment in renewables is not enough right now, and that's why we have to continue.
Wait, just to
If
clarify.
anything, can I just
Yeah.
really quickly talk about that, right? If anything, there are two larger problems with renewables. It's about transmission capability and intermittency issues. How specifically do you solve for intermittency and transmission capability issues?
One,
with
we can
renewables?
get into that with rebuttal, and two, our evidence indicates that we're on an upward trend. 90% of new electricity are renewable, so that in
Right.
on net means that
We can be on an upward trend, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the fundamental issues of renewables are solved. Because the thing about renewables is that they are not scalable to the grid. Our electricity grid is
Wait.
meant for coal right now.
what evidence from your case says that?
Yeah, we're gonna read a little bit of evidence about that in a second, but I just wanna get your take on this. How specifically do we solve the problem of renewables not being able to scale up to our energy grid right now?
We argue they are, and we'll get into that to rebuttal. We've spent half of cross on this. Do you mind if I take a question?
Sure, go for it.
All right. What sort of energy are like the corporations using right now?
Yeah, corporations are using a mix of things, but specifically it tends to be more coal and gas.
Like what piece of evidence that indicates from your case that says Microsoft or Google or these big corporations primarily using like oil or gas?
Yeah, I think that it's just a general fact that the way that our grid is set up right now is the fact that it's reliable on coal and oil. And to say anything else would be a little bit preposterous. I'm gonna take a question now.
Wait.
Let's talk a little bit about subsidies, right? You say that if we invest in nuclear energy, there's going to be, at some point, problem in investment, and it's going to cost millions of people millions of dollars. Specifically, has the US ever done a project on nuclear energy like this before? Have we ever invested millions domestically on nuclear energy?
Yes, we have, and we'd argue it's been a disaster. Every time we did that, maybe like the Yucca Mountain incident,
Wait.
that on net means we increased the subsidies and it turned the ratepayer, like it put the cost to those ratepayers and the people paying the
How
cost.
much did we put in subsidies on Yucca Mountain?
I'm not sure the exact cost. I don't have the evidence in mind,
Right,
but
but I
that
think
like
that's
those,
really important.
it's empirically like whenever we did investments or government intervention via subsidies or any sort of that thing, it ultimately led to a demise of that nuclear plant. Now Yucca Mountain is shut down because the ratepayers simply
Sure.
couldn't afford the
I would
electricity.
say that Yucca Mountain was shut down for a number of other reasons, among the fact that there wasn't enough investment. When the government is able to stably invest in something like nuclear energy, we can solve. But that's cross.
We're gonna run the cross.
Sounds good.
That's 40 seconds of prep. So the order of this speech is just going to be a general response to the speech that they just gave last time. It'll start on their argument about the climate and then the argument about the economy. If everyone is good, my time starts now. Let's start on their argument about climate change. They first tell you this piece of evidence that renewables has made up more than 90% of the current technology. Remember our evidence from last year that does a meta-analysis of all greenhouse gas emissions and finds that we have been tending upward, emitting more and passing thresholds that we've never passed before. We are now locked into a cycle that is above 1.5 degrees Celsius, somewhere we thought we would be 20 years from now. We are 20 years early to the climate disaster. So no, what we are doing right now is not working. Our evidence looked at models where nuclear energy was scaled up when the government took control. What the issue is right now is that independent private companies are doing piece-by-piece parts, which is slowing down the process. Our meta-analysis, which looks at 15 years of data, found that when we increased nuclear energy from the government in France and Sweden, they were able to say two things. That in less than 10 years, they were able to replace all of fossil fuels. But second, our evidence holistically finds that the price of electricity goes down 40%. This is really important because it shows you two things. You're decreasing costs for consumers, but at the same time, you're being able to scale the model up. But second, our CLAC evidence specifically isolates that even if they are right that the technology works, the grid itself cannot sustain the technology. In other words, what this means is that we don't have the systems to scale up renewable energy, which is why we're hitting the same wall over and over and again. But third, nuclear energy is much better than renewable energy because renewable energy actually increases emissions. As our evidence finds, they release dangerous gas and electric fuel stations rely on coal-powered electricity. But second, they harm the water and air quality as mining disrupts ecosystems and releases contaminants. Third, our evidence finds that emissions from nuclear are around the same as wind and generate 4 times lower gigawatts than solar. Our evidence has two comparisons. That one, renewable energy shuts off. Solar only works when there's sun. Wind only works when there's wind. But nuclear energy runs 24/7, and our evidence finds that you can scale it up. But third, a wind farm requires 360 times more land than nuclear facilities. But fourth, our evidence actually does the holistic analysis and truly finds that the nuclear industry actually decreases greenhouse gas emissions and, most importantly, small modular reactors can be deployed in less than 2 years, which means you see the benefits because when we increase in nuclear energy as a country, we do a couple things. We build large-scale reactors, but then in every town and city, we're able to put smaller modular reactors, which can be built really, really fast, which is a novel technology that we need to ramp up. Let's go on to the argument about subsidies. This argument is quite unlogical because when we did the IRA that was passed, over $1 billion in funding for renewable energy, in green energy, taxpayers were not impacted. What does this mean? In the past, when the government has done these subsidies for other types of energy projects, we have not seen taxpayers face the cost. They're going to come up here in the next speech and tell you, there are these examples of Yucca Mountain. There are these examples where prices went up. But our argument is quite simple. The reason prices go up is because it was not a collective project taken by the government. They cannot give you a single project that was funded fully by the government and also taken out by the government. But in countries where we did see this, we saw success. So I end you with a couple things. That one, SMRs are 2 years from deployment. Second, meta-analysis from other countries find that renewables are not scalable and nuclear energy is the only way to replace the grid. But third, our evidence finds that long-term electricity prices go down when you have nuclear energy there. So remember, in this round, you embody not an educator, but a policymaker. Those who have been quiet and silenced for so long, the climate crisis continues and people are being harmed. You have a chance to solve that.
All right. So just for clarification, I'm Dean Murphy, speaking second for Palm Harbor on the negative. The order of my 4-minute rebuttal will simply just be defending against the rebuttal Stevan just gave, then I'll go on to attack my opponent's case. So, Judge, you ready? Okay. Tons? Okay. On that note, start with my first word. The first piece of evidence Devon brings into his rebuttal comes from last year and tries to tell you that emissions are increasing, but you have to evaluate evidence based on the date that it is written. Our governing evidence comes from 2025 and indicates two specific things that prove we are on an upward trend. First, it finds that holistically speaking, 2024 emissions were on net down from previous years. And second, it couples this with the analysis by finding that comparing 2005 emissions to 2024, we are down 20%. If these numbers don't prove anything to you about how right now we are currently solving, then I do not know what will. Secondly, they bring up this empiric about how France and Sweden had some great renewable and nuclear energy, but you have to realize this proves our argument. The energy transition article indicates that the inability of nuclear to ramp down while renewables ramp up in France has caused an energy crisis in their economy, which is why their rates are going up right now. This proves that sure, even if you want to paint a perfect picture of a world where we invest billions into fundamentally theoretical technology, there's going to be an increase in ratepayer costs. And secondly, they try to tell you that renewables are bad because the sun doesn't shine every single day. But the sun is always shining somewhere, maybe not just in the United States. Our argument indicates that when you affirm, you reverse this progress that we've been building for decades to solve emissions, which is why our evidence indicates that since the 1970s we've been building nuclear reactors, but those have fundamentally done nothing to help the problem writ large. Thirdly, they talk about how SMRs can be this fundamentally new technology, but ask yourself why in 2023, when we invested almost $1 billion into SMRs, we never actually saw their impacts occur. And lastly, they talk about how the IRA does not lead to any tax, and it does not lead to any sort of increase in ratepayers, but the IRA is not direct investment. It is tax credits to renewable energy companies, which is why that does not apply to our arguments. At the end of their rebuttal, you're left with a lot of questions on to why their case is standing, but they have not touched the fact that when you increase investment in nuclear energy, companies jump the gun, bite the cost of building nuclear energy, and shift all that overrun cost to the ratepayers, which for every single person in the United States increases your energy bill per month. But let's go on to my opponent's case. There are a few questions here. First, the only piece of evidence they read about how nuclear is so much more efficient than renewable energy comes from literally 4 years ago. Our evidence comes from this year by finding that renewables over a year are up 90% in solving climate change emissions. But on the first argument about data centers, there's a fundamentally wrong piece of this argument. One, other companies like Amazon with X Energy and Google and Microsoft that have AI data centers are taking it into their own hands and already investing with nuclear companies, which is why the GS research evidence finds that the problem with federal investment is the fact of their lack of efficiency in federal government. It indicates that when we issue federal permits for these small modular reactors, it can take almost up to 10 years for it to get actually fully implemented into data centers. What this means is that the problem is being solved right now, affirming adds fuel to the fire. But on their second argument about cancer, there's a few things to note. We have had the 9-point-mile reactor since the 1970s, which has the ability to generate scandium-47, but the problem is it's simply not profitable enough. I know it's really nice to come up here and say that when you invest in nuclear energy, you can solve cancer, but the problem is in a capitalist society, we won't just throw away billions and trillions of dollars that can be sent to energy consumers for solving cancer because it's never been proven before. But lastly, on their argument about climate change, this is devastating for them. The first argument that they bring up is fundamentally wrong because our Jacobson evidence concludes that nuclear reactors meant to stop climate change take up to 19 years to build, and historically speaking, when you look to other countries like China, the Jacobson evidence indicates that almost 700,000 people died in direct air pollution from nuclear plants. At that point, we have brought the only piece of evidence that does the causal relation and indicates that because of nuclear energy, these people died. At the end of the day, we've had plans for decades. Why haven't we solved these impacts? The simple answer to that question is nuclear energy is not the solution to everything.
All right, we've taken 40 minutes. We're just going to keep running a little bit more time. So we have 2 minutes to answer.
Sounds good.
exactly 2 million total tokens.
Yeah.
Do we have for Koski?
Yeah.
All right. Can I get the first question since I spoke first?
Sure, yeah.
Let's talk about our argument on cancer. You said that we were able to refine scandium-47. Can you read me one line from any piece of evidence that is specific to scandium-47 when that can be built and processed by any local person? Because our evidence specifically isolates. The issue in the industry right now is not that we don't have these resources. The issue is we don't have the personnel and we don't have the ability in the industries to do it. Our evidence specifically...
What's the question here, Stefan?
So my question is, name me the one piece of evidence that we can already do it right now. Read me a line from your evidence verbatim, please.
Yeah, so I think you might have misunderstood my response that I gave in rebuttal. It's not that, oh, we can mass produce scandium-47 right now. It's the argument is that we've had nuclear reactors since the 1970s. Why haven't we done it yet? He said it himself, that we are lacking personnel. Ask yourself this, how does investment into plants mean more people just taking these jobs?
Let me explain that to you. I can actually explain it to you, right? The issue is not that we don't have enough people working the job, that the people themselves are not skilled enough. Our evidence specifically finds that right now, only big laboratories are able to isolate scandium-47, which means it can never be mass produced.
Wait, Stefan.
Our evidence specifically says, if we invest in nuclear energy, we create these things that are called linear accelerators. They're used for medical purposes. And it says that an unskilled, entry-level position worker can then produce these in the factories. It's the same thing with cars. It was very hard to build a car
I
first.
love your
So
enthusiasm.
when we were making, able to scale it up with a factory, it enables everyone to increase access to it. You can take a question.
Wait, real quick on that. I love your enthusiasm about solving cancer and this great argument about nuclear energy. But you still have to ask yourself, we've had reactors since the 1970s. Is really just one pressing of a button going to lead to this brand new revolutionary technology? Let's even look to 2023. We invested $1 billion into nuclear energy, and still nowhere in sight are we seeing this new solving cancer. But I'd like a question.
Sure.
Because we spent 2 minutes on this. So let's go on to this bad Dallas argument of ours.
Sure.
Right? So can we both agree that when you affirm companies jump the gun and build more reactors and ignore the costs?
No, I don't think they build more reactors and ignore the cost, right? Per our evidence, it says that what happens is the federal government is able to create a blueprint, right? What's happening right now is that private companies is, I'm building my own reactor, and they build individual parts. But our evidence says that the reason why companies don't jump the gun is because the federal government takes care of the planning and the scaling of it. And when we saw this in places like France and we saw it in places like Sweden, we were able to see energy prices drop. We were able to see emissions decrease. I think that's also the
I have 230.
I am at 250, so.
Okay.
You can take a last question if you want.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that that's not how federal subsidies work. Federal subsidies don't give you everything you need. They give you a set amount of money to use, and you take the rest out of your own bank, but that's cross.
We have one.
The order of my speech is going to be talking about the aff case, weighing, and then the net case. Alright. Every technology has its drawbacks, but we have to know when to invest. Specifically, right now is the perfect time for nuclear. We have billions of dollars to put into an industry that is promising because it is efficient and it is scalable, something that their technologies are not. Let's talk about our argument on AI. The response that they give you here is that there's a lack of federal efficiency, which means things don't get built quickly. But our evidence finds that small modular reactors can be developed in less than 24 months. That solves the issue of timing and is able to propel AI technology, which can grow the GDP by over 40% within the next 5 years. That saves millions of lives from poverty. But then, let's talk about our argument on cancer. They tell you that it's just not profitable. I think that this is ridiculous and nearly morally abhorrent, because if we have the closest cure to cancer, then we have a moral obligation to invest in it. And nuclear technology, specifically scandium-47, can take us there. That's why to save 600,000 lives from cancer every single year, you should be voting for nuclear energy. But our third argument about climate change, they tell you that it takes a long time to build nuclear energy. But when you invest a lot and your are able to scale up the technologies, it's able to happen in less than 24 months. But second, they tell you that there's nuclear pollution, but we would tell you that it's less pollution than mining from renewables, and these projects would have extreme oversight. So let's take a look at the bigger picture. We are in the middle of a climate crisis. Our BBC evidence from this year finds that carbon dioxide emissions have risen to an all-time high. But the way that we can solve this is through nuclear energy, and past implementations prove our argument, as Correcha in 13 quantifies that nuclear energy has saved 83 million people in the past globally. But if we stay on the path we're on right now, billions will be displaced because of climate change. Let's talk about their arguments though, specifically on renewables. Our Matthews evidence finds that renewables are much worse than nuclear energy because renewables generate four times more greenhouse gases than nuclear energy. But green tech requires rare earth mineral mining, which causes even more pollution. Remember, if renewables was a catch-all solution, then we would have seen its impacts by now. But nuclear energy has been empirically underinvested in. But let's talk about their argument on subsidies. Specifically, they want to tell you, we're going to increase your energy bill, but this is patently false because our QVIST evidence looks at modeling and what it would look like in the US and tells you that it would drop prices by over 40%. That's why, to reduce your energy bill and to save millions of lives from climate change, Fairmont is proud to affirm.
Okay, we'll be taking some prep starting now. just to reiterate, we're going into second summary, and I'm the first speaker for point.
Wait, give me 1 second. Sorry.
Okay. Is everyone ready? Currently, our growth in renewables is exceeding expectations, with goals of 90% carbon reduction by the next few years in close reach, making electricity the cleanest it has ever been. However, increased investment in nuclear plants takes decades to actually see the benefits. Thus, the most important argument in today's debate is our argument about bailouts. When a government dumps billions into an energy industry, companies take this as a green light to ignore their budgets and build reactors without having consumers in mind. And that shift to nuclear is a massive step backwards, since ratepayers pick up 85% of total costs. Therefore, national investment would mean widespread poverty. UCS 19 argues that 2 reactors in Florida already raised customer bills by 10%, and Clementi 14 warns a 10% increase in energy costs would push 140,000 Americans into poverty. You know, for a fact, every time the government has done subsidies in the past, it's just increased the cost for ratepayers. It's historically proven. But their argument about renewables, saying that it causes more emission, is completely ludicrous. They say that it causes more emissions because you need to mine for rare earth minerals, but that evidence is specific to fossil fuel mining, and how we can even mine for renewables if it's the sun or wind or ocean. But just relying on nuclear means that you have to mine for uranium, which is a rare earth mineral in itself, so you're permanently stuck to mining uranium in the affirmative world. But then, on to the second argument. They say we can reduce the energy prices, but no, there's no actual reasoning or warranting. If you can't answer the question on why it reduces energy, don't buy the response. And we tell you that on net, whenever we increase the amount of subsidies, it pushes those companies to have dire consequences in which they can be able to feel like they can push off the costs to the ratepayers. But even then, remember, the energy trade-off evidence. We have told you that the nuclear grid, even then, go into their case. Firstly, on the affirmative, they say that every technology has its drawbacks, so we shouldn't put 100% of our trust in just one technology. But also, they say that it's more efficient, but our evidence, it's not efficient. It says, our evidence indicates that it's not efficient, and their evidence is from 4 years ago. You should buy our evidence, which is more recent on that date. But also, they say that SMRs take 24 months. Other companies don't do, we have told you that other companies are already privately investing in solving for the issue themselves, whether it's renewable, hydro, or SMRs themselves. Also, that avoids the federal permits problem, but even then, on their argument about cancer, they misunderstand our response. We are not saying that we should invest in cancer treatment, but we are arguing that history proves that every single investment has never been used to solve cancer, but rather to make profits. And on their last argument about climate change, they have not acknowledged the fact that when other countries invest in nuclear, over 700,000 people died in direct cause for nuclear air pollution. And 2, it skewed renewables out of the grid because of all the incompatibility with the issues, and that you can't have renewables and nuclear. You have to pick one and vote for the one that you know is working now.
Alright, good for class.
Yeah.
First question. For sure. Right. So, per Amrita's speech, she read this piece of evidence and extended a different case, which was that emissions are at an all-time high. And that was conceded. That wasn't responded to on the last speech, right? So if you're telling me that
I don't think that's necessarily
if
true,
renewables are working,
Mm-hmm.
why are emissions at the all-time high as of 2025?
Like I said, that's not necessarily true. Chris, the first thing he said in his speech is that renewables are increasing right now, and thus the gap in the evidence finds that since 2005 as a benchmark, and since pre-COVID levels, we're down almost 20% from those emission levels. And it does the analysis by finding that just taking into account 2024, when we had the most investment in renewables, it's on net down. So saying that there's no response to this is just ludicrous.
Okay,
But can I get a question?
No, but let's talk about that really quickly,
Yeah.
right? Even if there's a contest of whether emissions have increased or decreased or stayed the same, isn't it true that we hit an all-time high of temperatures last year?
No, the evidence indicates
Wait,
from Gaffney.
What evidence
wait,
says?
Okay.
What evidence says that
Wait,
our
wait.
globe
From-
has decreased
Right,
in
I think
temperature?
Wait,
that was the evidence.
One second. Saying that temperature increase means that emissions go up is just a drawing line
Wait,
where it's
I
not
don't know.
drawn.
That's not what I'm saying.
There are tons of alternate causes for
that's-
temperature increasing, like different time periods,
Yeah.
different like geological cycles, that doesn't have to do with emissions. The only piece of evidence that you should be looking at in this debate says that emissions have decreased. We spent half the cross on this. Can we get a question,
Go
please?
for it.
Alright, let's go on to just this entire AF case. If we can both agree that we have already invested in nuclear energy since the 1970s, why have we not seen cancer solving or AI like energy solving? Why is now different? Because every single investment ever done by the government has only slowed things
There's a
down.
couple of reasons for that. In the last few decades, there have been a handful of reactors that have been built in the United States. I could count them on my hands right now. That's why when we see an increase, a substantial increase in domestic nuclear energy investment, we will see many more plants pop up, and that's when we see solvency for things like cancer, like climate change. That's
Wait.
I think our
So-
evidence, like, to answer the question, you're like, to follow it up, right? Our evidence isolates that technology exists. We have these radioactive isotopes. It's the scaling up that's the issue, and it specifically finds that when you're able to create more linear accelerators, medical nuclear technology, when you're able to put more money behind it, you lower the cost to actually create it, and entry-level technicians then can create it and scale it up. It says that production costs can go from a whole day to a mere minutes, which is the big difference.
Stefan, just to clarify, even though we've maybe done nuclear an investment in France and had those nuclear reactors, we still haven't seen cancer cured in France or any other country
Right.
like
The
China.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead, we saw 700,000 people die in China because of air pollution,
Right.
nuclear air pollution.
And our
Also, we
evidence-
can see the response since we're born.
Okay, just to clarify the class before cross ends, it's super logical to assume that no other countries also have this technology since we all cooperate on cancer treatment. Put simply, history disproves the argument. You should vote neg here. That's cross.
We have 44 seconds.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Good stuff. So it's just going to start on just the main points of clash. We'll start on the climate debate and then some of the other debates. If everyone is good, my time can start now. The round boils down to, is this technology worth investing in? And historically, the data has said so. We saw a 40% decrease in oil consumption in France and Sweden when we were able to implement it through the government. Our evidence finds that renewables are 4 times more emitting than nuclear energy. Third, our evidence specifically from last year finds that renewables are able to scale up because there's grid issues and the battery can only hold for a certain period of time, which means it's very limited use. Our evidence specifically finds that nuclear reactors are more efficient because they run 24 hours, but second, they can be scaled up as small modular nuclear reactors in less than 2 years. But the most important piece of evidence, they're going to come and say that nuclear technology has displaced or killed X amount of people. I'm not going to contest it. It's a fact that nuclear energy has done harm. But you have to look at the bigger picture. Our evidence isolates that nuclear energy has saved 83 million lives just since 2005. That's the more important piece of evidence. Because the technology can harm a certain amount of population, but you have to do the cost-benefit analysis. If it's saving 83 million lives every single 20 years, that's a big number which they have not contested. And when you're weighing this in the round, you as a policymaker have a moral obligation to vote for the number that's proven true. It is proven to save 83 million lives, and it's the largest number in the round. So when there's a lot of policies on your desks, you have to choose the one that affects the best amount of people in the population. But second, our evidence specifically finds that right now, companies such as Microsoft and Amazon want to be able to cut down their emissions and increase artificial intelligence. But they cannot increase artificial intelligence because they need a better energy source for it, which is why nuclear energy can solve. And when we have increased AI, we're more connected around the world, we're able to solve other issues faster. So at the end of the day, you break this debate like this. Progress has stalled. Is this the world that you are content with? Where temperatures at an all-time high since this year, from 2025, and emissions have been up 50%. If that's not the world you want to live in, it's time to take a leap forward.
Alright, so just to clarify again, Dean Murphy, second for Palm Harbor on the negative. The order of my speech is simply just be clarifying the round, and I'll go ahead and let you know where I'm starting. I'm going to start on our case. Everyone ready? Sounds good. The most important argument in today's debate is our argument about bailouts. Savant's final focus did not interact with the fact that when federal subsidies pour into a market like nuclear energy, companies take this as the green light to go ignore their budgets and build these plants at no matter cost it takes. This is historically proven because our evidence finds that every single federal subsidy in a funded nuclear project has had cost overruns, and 85% of those costs have been pinned on the tax and ratepayers. Why does this matter? Sure, renewables may not be that good like they have claimed, but they have not interacted with the fact that when you invest domestically, it substantially increases nuclear energy, it causes 800,000 Americans to go into poverty, and hikes paying rates up 10%. Why does this matter? First, on their argument about cancer treatment, if people are spending so much money on energy and people are in poverty, that means the less amount of people that can get access to cancer treatment. And even then, they have not interacted with the fact that right now, without nuclear energy, we are seeing decrease of emissions by 20% and an increase in renewables, which draws a direct correlation, and our gap evidence turns it into a causal study by doing an experiment and finding that when we increase renewables, we substantially decrease our emissions. Sure, temperatures may be up, but think about how absurd it is to have no evidence connecting the two. But on their argument, on their case, the first thing you have to realize, they paint the picture about how they can save 83 million lives. First, you yourself, Judge Say, in your paradigm, don't let new arguments come after rebuttals. Where was this number this entire round? They have no reasoning or warranting for it. Whereas our evidence has been in our case and concluded that once China increased nuclear energy, there is a 700,000 people died because of it, directly drawing a causal effect. If they agreed that there's harms, do not let them just brush by this huge number. And last, they try to make this amazing picture of data centers and how it's so efficient. Remember, their most recent evidence is from 2021. It'd be absolutely illogical to vote on this argument, since our evidence comes from 2025 and finds that private companies are increasing data centers without having to deal with the slow federal permitting. Please negate history votes for our side, so should you.
And Judge, thank you so much for judging.
Yeah, appreciate it.